Well, I'm very honored to be here. Estonia, Estonia, one way or another, has probably done more in the general area of what you're talking here about than anyone else. And it's probably the result of a perfect storm of having public support, NGO support, government willingness, technologically thinking and educated people, good legislation, and a general very high appreciation of openness. Why all of that is true, we can perhaps discuss later, but I mean, given that we're a former Soviet republic and had a very poor and all these other things, has something to do with it. Being close to Finland has something to do with it. But in any case, why we can talk about later. But what we have done and what we have realized is that by a small country like mine, already plagued by the problem of having not enough people, can in fact do a lot of things because if it wisely uses technology. And so opening up with e-taxation or online, filling out your online taxation forms in the middle 90s, we have now today, actually already by the end of the 90s, 95% of people were were doing their taxes online. And to get at a number like that, you have to also keep in mind, which I think is a general principle for any discussion of openness, is that that the e-governance does not mean putting a 1040 taxation form into HTML. You have to redo things. You have to make it for the user. You have to stop thinking in terms of 19th century bureaucratic rules where everything is on paper. Redesigning, that ends up meaning redesigning government and how you interact with people, which is a broader concept, but we first ran into this with the taxation. So we have e-taxation. We have an e-healthcare system, which is probably one of the most disruptive things that I think will hit us all soon, which is that you own, in my country, you own your own data. You have, the doctor doesn't own it, the hospital doesn't own it, you own your own data. And so if there's we've been talking for years about getting a second opinion. Well, you can get a 302nd second opinion because you just take your data to another doctor. And what this will do in terms of disruption is it will remove the sacerdotal or priesthood, priest-like role of the doctor, which we've had ever since Hippocrates, and with the patient as supplicant, and it will turn into something else. And I think this is going to be a big mess for the next 10, 15 years with the AMA and all doctors around the world. We have e-voting. 25% of the population voted in online. And in our last election, that was the third time. The first time, I think, was 7%. The second time was about 25% this time. We have digital prescriptions, which if you go see a doctor, they'll write out your prescription, and you can go to any pharmacy in the country, and you give them your ID card, and they'll give you what you want. And you don't have to go to get another handwritten, illegible prescription. If you need a refill, you call your doctor and he'll give you a refill. All students in Estonia know what their homework is because their homework is there. We have an e-school system in which all homework assignments are on there, and you can also log on as a parent and check on what your kid is doing, and so on and so on and so on. What has allowed us to do it is a fairly intelligent, in my opinion even, technological response, or an innovation for the people who are technically minded. It's the key issue, of course, is identification and security of identification. We use a serial enterprise bus, which require an independent authenticating center, privately owned, in fact, which requires double authentication. If you want to go look at your tax records, they first you have to be verified, and then the tax system has to be verified. Think of it as a big spine with ribs on it. We have 330 services on 330 spines. You can look at anything that belongs to you anywhere. And of course, each spine, or rather each rib, be it the taxation authority or the health system, can look at everyone in their system, but they can never, the police can never look at your health records. I mean, this solves the big problem of paranoia of all data being in one place, and so far it works, and it's worked very well, and we've been, it's our new form of foreign aid. We're giving the software to countries that are, so far, recently democratized or poor countries. After our recent experiences with some countries in Western Europe, I think we'll be giving foreign aid to some countries that are far richer than we. Also, but we can talk about that later. The obstacles to doing this are all of the things that I said we don't have. I mean, it's public objections to doing this, people, the sort of Luddite tendencies, an unwillingness of government to take risks. We have been blessed with a parliament which is very fractious in all other issues, but for some reason, regardless of political persuasion, the parliament, in very antagonistic relations between parties in the parliament, we have managed to find near unanimity on the legislation that is required for doing all of this. And of course, that leads to the other thing. The legislative key is just as important. I mean, think of legislation as part of the software package. Unless you have the legislation that clearly spells out what you can do, then no, it doesn't matter how good your software can be, but you need to have, you need to have a digital signature law, you need to have all kinds of verification procedures. These have to be all legally sound. But back to objections, I mean, if the government doesn't want it, if your cultural traditions don't want it, as I discovered doing the e-health system, e-health task force for the European Commission, that there are countries that will never, ever go do e-health simply because of cultural traditions that won't allow them. They will appeal to privacy concerns in the what Churchill called the English-speaking peoples. The idea of an ID card is anathema, but if you don't have a really good ID system, then none of this will work. You cannot have e-governance services unless your citizens can be assured that they are really private. On the openness side, let me say, which is the other focus here, we have, I mean, basically, we put everything up if it's government related. Any official correspondence that's remotely, that is not sort of national security importance that comes to me gets put up. Sometimes, I mean, in fact, we are so eager to do all this that some of my own private correspondence has ended up on the presidential webpage. Just because I once asked for an offer on how much it would take to do some electrical work on my house, and then they sent the reply to my official address, and then the next day in the yellow papers, President wants government to pay for his house and for his house repairs. I said, no, this was just that the person put the thing up, but it's all there. So if anyone, all the crazy letters and all of the good things that come, and they're all up there. The amount of information you have to provide as a government employee or as an elected official on your whatever interest declaration forms, which are all up, is far more than I guess the Swedes and the Finns also have about as much as we do. But in any case, so it's openness, it's e-governance that so far has the population behind it. It has allowed us, as a formerly Soviet country, formerly communist country in Eastern Europe, and all the negativity that is always and commonly associated with that, be far less corrupt than many of the major West European countries, and in fact, we're basically as corrupt as the United States. In fact, we're at the same point in the Transparency International list. I would agree with you, by the way, that in fact, national levels of corruption in my country are actually very, very low, thanks to the transparency. But since there are really no transparency rules on our local governments, which have a very strong claim to autonomy, and they've never bothered to do anything in this regard. Okay, the first question is why the government is willing to, well, we had a completely different government. We had awful bad commies, and then we had young people who were in their late 20s and early 30s making the government that wanted to do nothing the way it was done before. So, I mean, it's the moral equivalent of legacy technology being thrown out or not having that. And so, I mean, in many ways, I mean, what happened in countries like mine was that you basically put a minus sign in anything that you had before, and you do it differently. So if everything was secret before, then you make it open. If there was a very bad communications in the country, you realize that's what you have to do well. So in that sense, now it's harder. I mean, now we've been doing this for 21 years, and now I'm fighting with the government. We have a parliamentary system. The president does not have executive authority, but so I fight with the government because I don't think they're doing enough, or they're not moving fast enough. The sequencing of law and technology requires smart people in technology and law. Where's someone? There. You need smart people in technology and law, which we fortunately have a few. But because you have to realize what you can do, I mean, what is entailed. I mean, if we have I mean, it took a while to work out the digital signature law in my country 12 years ago, 13 years ago. But once you have the digital signature law, and which was done in cooperation between people doing technology and people who are legal scholars, then when that's firmly in place, you can then move on, and anything that requires a signature from that point on, you put in that it is equivalent to this, and so you can do all kinds of things. I mean, that is really, I would say, by the way, that the legal signature law is the sine qua non of any e-governance. If you don't have that, it's not going to work. The EU does not want to have an EU signature law, so it's not going to work. Privacy culture. Well, I've had this big argument with all through anywhere where I do anything, and everyone says we have a privacy culture, we can't do that. I would argue, I mean, the Germans say we had a Nazi experience, therefore we cannot, we have a privacy culture. Well, we had a Soviet experience. I mean, I don't think that's the real argument. And other people say, well, I mean, this is like in the English-speaking world, no ID cards. Why we have managed to do this, I think partially, as I said, is because people saw it was easy to do things. On the other hand, I would argue that your privacy is better if you're doing things electronically than if on paper. We had this big argument a lot, I mean, throughout in the EU e-health task force, which was full of lawyers as well, who are all concerned. Basically, what you have right now is you have your files in a file. I mean, your health records right now probably exist somewhere in a big file cabinet. Who goes in there and who looks at that, you have no idea. If you have an e-health system, anytime anyone goes into that, they're immediately flagged. And there's no doubt about it. People do bad things. They will do that. And we had a policewoman who was checking on her boyfriend because she had access to his police records. Well, she got fired because as soon as she did that, the little red flag goes up and says, this person not really authorized to be looking at these data. So, I mean, the solutions to that, I think, are electronic. You can basically, there is nothing that's private anymore. Nothing is private anyway, so you might as well take advantage of what you can use, because anyone can hack into anything today, and anyway, paper is less secure. So, I mean, I would say you have to. The way to get around that is to provide even better services that people would like to use, rather than anything else. I mean, if you have a government that has all kinds of people in it who are thinking about how to do it this way or that way or do it better, you end up with solutions. So it's not as if the government is having its teeth pulled to do this, but rather you have people come up with ideas and how do you like this. In fact, I mean, with the idea of doing digital prescriptions was completely a government initiative, fought by just about everybody, and the public was very, very angry about having this thing. I don't know, I mean, it's hard to tell why. I mean, it had some glitches in the system, but then within 6 months, 90% of the people were using it. But this was completely a government initiative. But the initiative was not from, I mean, this was from people who said, hey, we have this idea, let's try it. And the minister said, okay, let's try it. So it is not this dichotomization that, government bad, evil, and nasty, and public, sort of enlightened, and but not knowing what to do. There was a cultural moment in 1991 to 95 where he said, we have to trash everything. I mean, to say anything was done this way before was immediately the kiss of death. So there was an openness to doing things differently, and that's why we didn't have this kind of conservative, let's not do anything new.